So how? That's the big question, right? And I think what I was told for a long time is that my life and my relationship with God is going to inform the way that I teach, right? And I wholeheartedly believe that. Yes, what happens in my life and what God is doing in my life absolutely makes it into my classroom, and the renewal that He's doing in me is going to change the way that I teach. But I've come to this point when I'm not really happy to just say, like, I do a good quiet time, and then my classroom is biblically integrated. I really wanted to get down to, no, you still have to plan it, right? You still have to have some way to approach it other than your own Bible study time, right, or your own growth in your own faith. So I was really gifted with people who took the time to teach me how to plan it, and that's what I want to do with you, is give you a few ways to plan it. So again, your goals are understanding what biblical integration is and is not, and then that specific planning within a unit so that you can write biblically integrated lesson objectives. So this is my first tool for me, or not for me, for you. My first tool for you. This is actually your first purple page. And there are two sides to this. There's an immediate side and a primary side. So all of what's up on the screen is actually the intermediate, because that's what I use. But the primary language is a little bit more primary. So there's these 5 posters, and I said that I've approached worldview through these 5 different categories. And really the idea is God, creation, mankind, moral order, and purpose. I feel like maybe if I change my... There you go. The idea is that all kind of faith systems can be kind of split up into these 5 categories. That if I was looking at Buddhism, that I could separate what they believe about God or a higher power, what they think about creation or the world around them, what they think about people, what they think about right and wrong, and what they think about why people are here. The idea is to kind of break this mammoth idea of worldview into kind of 5 more manageable categories. They're still enormous, but it's really just starting to break down and give you a way to approach a topic as large as biblical integration. So, first thing in the school year, I have these posters hanging up in my classroom, and I have them hanging up in my classroom, and I also give my kids a copy of it. And we go over and we read them like, these are the things that Christians believe about these 5 areas. Christians believe that God is triune. Christians believe that God created everything. And I first just started having them kind of read over it, and I put it in front of them like, maybe they'll catch on, right? But that was totally not working. So my next year, I needed to go deeper with them. And so I actually started... I took each one of these things, and I made each one of these things we call them truths or principles. I took each one and I made it morning work. So I took this bold, man is lower than God but above creation, and I took those verses and I made it into like a little, like an entry task. And so I gave my kids verses like this, and this is obviously a lot of text, so it was a lot of learning how to approach a lot of text in one time, but it was also... I started working with them on how to pull out what's true from the Bible, so that I think my kids, just like people that I've worked with, have gotten stuck on, like, if the verse doesn't say exactly that, what do I do, right? And so I've been working with my kids on looking at more than one verse to kind of put together a biblical principle. So I would give my kids these verses, and I would ask them to highlight any repeating ideas or to circle any key words or anything that jumped out at them. And there's a lot of principles on these 5 posters, so it took us a long time. But my goal was to give them verbiage to be able to talk about Christian worldview, to be able to talk about and say, Christians believe this. So that when we were reading a story, that they could have words to say, I don't think that's right because, and they would have words to actually say. So a lot of times I just gave them verses and they just highlighted or circled, and then we would discuss really briefly. And obviously I was not looking for deep sinking in of that knowledge, because we would spend 10 minutes on it. I was really just looking for some kind of familiarity. Now I know that you've read a couple of times and we've talked about how mankind is lower than God but above creation. So that when we came back to something like that in our classroom, it would ring some kind of distant bell in their heads. So sometimes I just gave them verses to read, and sometimes I did give them things where they would list, they would make lists, or sometimes we would categorize a little bit, but mostly it was just reading. So I started them here with giving them this familiarity with the idea of worldview and a little bit of language on what Christians believe. So that's where I started. And then we would get into a unit, and I would kind of draw out what I wanted what I wanted to hit within that unit. So before Journeys, we were reading There's an Owl in the Shower, and I looked at these 4: man has been given dominion over the earth, man is made in the image of God and has value in earth, man is lower than God but above creation, and man was made for a purpose. So I knew in my head that I wanted them to get there, right? And then as we read the story, I would ask them, awkward questions like, what about what that person thinks? Is that right? Or does that line up with what God would think? And we would discuss all these different things, and we looked at all these different quotes from within the book and from different places. And I asked them over and over, what does this person believe about people and animals? The story, I don't know if you guys know the story. It's about a logging town where logging has been banned because the owls are dying, right? So of course people are angry and arguing about who's more important, the people or the animals, right? So I would ask my kids, what does this person believe about people and animals? And after they could talk about, this person believes this, and I know that because of what he did or what he said, then I would say, okay, so is that a godly worldview? Is what that person thinks, does that line up with what we know is a godly worldview? And then we went even further and we're able to say, like, not everybody has their perfect godly worldview, right? That would be heaven. So in what ways is this lining up, and in what ways is it not lining up? And so their final essay on this actually was taking a character from the book and saying, this person has a godly worldview in this way, and an ungodly worldview in this way. So after we had picked it apart, they could actually look at a character and say, they're hitting the mark here, and they're really confused on this. And it was really key to give them the language to work through. And here's another example. We studied, since I teach, I forgot to tell you, I am so lucky at Bellevue Christian in that I landed exactly within my comfort zone in teaching. I teach reading and social studies to both 6th grade classes, and I don't have to teach math or science. And that's great. And I will say that really does set me up ideally for biblical integration. I feel like those are your 2 easiest subjects to integrate, so I will come right out and say I know I'm working with the easiest population for biblical integration, the 6th graders, in the 2 easiest subjects. But it's great. One of the things that we've been studying, we study ancient cultures, and we've studied Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and now we're on to Rome. And it's really great. We study all the different gods at all these different points, right? So we've looked at the ancient Egyptians believe in these weird gods that they have no way of relating to, but we got them to okay, the Egyptians believe in all of these different gods. If they believe in all these gods, what do they actually think about creation? What do they see in creation? And then we were able to get at, all people have a spirit, soul, and a body, and everybody's hungry to feed their spirits, right? So kids are kind of okay, yeah, Egyptians were just trying to feed their spirits. And then we got down to, okay, if everybody's trying to feed their spirits with something, and nobody in Bellevue is talking about these Egyptian gods, Ra and Anubis and all of these people, I'm not going to go looking or sacrificing to a god with a jackal head or anything like that. That's not what our culture does. But our culture is going to be doing something to feed their spirits. So what are we doing that's just like that with a different name? And kids were able to do sports, food. They were right away able to start kind of identifying those false gods. And it was because we got to this point of saying, man is these different pieces. You are body, spirit, and soul, whether or not you know it. And whether or not you know it, body, spirit, and soul, you're going to feed all 3 all the time. So once they started to build in this language, it opened up this route for us. So this is a resource that I would really, our school has started adopting. A lot of teachers individually have bought these posters and have started working with them. And this was really where I was able to start. So I would definitely encourage you in that to look into that. And that's on that first website that I noted for you, biblicalintegration.com. So I started here, and then was able to start working in to kind of more planning pieces, right? So for a long time I was kind of looking at that, kind of looking at my units in that way, but there's more than just kind of principles that you want to teach, right? So this is actually your first yellow page, if you want to turn there. And this is an actual unit planner. So what I want to do today is give you time to plan how to integrate within a unit, using some of those poster ideas, but using a few other things also. So that top half just says lesson or unit objectives and major concepts, and we all know how to fill that in, right? You all brought a unit with you, and you can always draw out your major objectives and concepts. The bottom half is divided up: God, creation, mankind, moral order, and purpose. And it's really looking at how do your lesson or unit objectives how can you integrate each piece? How can you integrate worldview within that? So I have an example for you. But before my example, here we go. So some things, these biblical principles, this is what I pull off of posters. I pull biblical principles off of posters and I just write them right on in, wherever I think they might line up. And then I do write open-ended questions. Anytime that there's a verse or a story, we're studying ancient Rome now, so obviously there are a lot of stories that kind of line right on up, because that's when it happened. Any related moral issues, real-life examples, or anytime somebody thinks something else and it has some major consequence. So I use those things, I use these things, pull these things out, and fill out this organizer. So my example started with Rome. I'm looking at these different pieces. We talked about Romulus and Remus, legends and stories, key points of Roman history. You don't really need to know all of them, except that it'll make your next part flow a little bit more if you kind of skim down some of those. We talked about the Punic Wars. We're going to talk about the Colosseum. Talking about these different pieces. Down here on the bottom, it says that we're going to examine Roman historical figures. We're going to need that in a second. So these are my major objectives that I'm going to cover at some point in my unit. My next step was to start filling out those 5 different categories. So I did it in different colors just to kind of show you my thinking process. I filled out that top half super, super easy, and I literally was sitting in front of my fireplace trying to fill out the bottom half and caught myself going, actually, doing the little kid thing of being frustrated and not being able to think of anything. This is the part that's really hard. So the first thing that I did is I went back and I looked at posters, and all of what's in red is language that I just pulled right off of the poster and copied and pasted into here. So I said, God sets the moral standard, and then I had a little bit of a question afterwards. What would God have said to them? I pull off, man has dominion over the earth. How did the Romans' laws and values show that privilege? Man is made in the image of God. How did the Romans honor this, and how did they not? Man is moral and creative. How do we see these qualities reflected in the ancient Roman people? So all of the red was really just something that I pulled off of there, and then I wrote myself a little question, like as a reminder, what am I going to ask them? How am I going to get them there? So that's all of your red. And then the blue was just questions that I thought somehow I could probably ask my kids this. What do the Romans' daily lives show about their belief in God, their government, their expansion, their architecture, their entertainment? They weren't worshiping God, so who or what were they worshiping? What do their legends show us about all people? What would